Life. Ah, yes.
Dead things.
Yeah, dead things.
Hey, we're alive.
No, biology doesn't have anything to do with things that are dead.
That's why you dissect
Post-living things. Study of the living and post-living situations, as long as they haven't been dead for too long, because then they become rock and it turns into a geology. I will as soon as I decide to say something that I feel like everyone needs to hear. Biology is many times credited with one of the main reasons, one of the biggest reasons why we can look at the world today and supposedly determine that it's been here for millions and billions of years, and that everything evolved from each other. As a matter of fact, thank you. As a matter of fact, that's where Darwin got his idea, was by looking at biology, looking at living things. He went down there in the Galapagos Islands. He rode around in a boat for a while, and he saw all these birds. I mean, just literally thousands of different kinds of birds. And he saw certain similarities between the birds and certain differences. And he concluded during that trip that they must have all come from the same place, and that over time they just changed slightly enough where you can still see the resemblance, but where they've developed differences enough to where they're actually separate species. Biology is really what started this whole thing in our day and age. Now, understand something. Evolution, the thought of evolution was long, long, long before Darwin.
Yeah.
You understand? I mean, way before Darwin. The ancient Chinese, back, 4,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, right in that range, believed that flies evolved into horses, which evolved into man. 3,000 years ago. Now, see, this idea hasn't been anything new. I mean, you think about it, what's the source of the lie? Who's the source of the lie? Satan. Okay. The same guy. The same guy. The only thing is that up until Darwin's time, nobody had ever given it any kind of credibility. Now, you can look and see how those Chinese myths and stuff came into play with the Roman things, and the Greek sort of mythology about the horses with wings, the half man, half goat, and this kind of a thing. See, all that is part of that play that evolved out of that early Chinese belief that there was a certain amount of evolution going on. And so we don't face anything new, it's just that we've changed the characters involved. Darwin was the first guy to come along and actually let it make some sense. Before it was pretty far-fetched, but he came along, he put some structure to it, and he immediately had a huge following. The reason was because there's a lot of people who already believed in it. Lots and lots of scientists already believed in it, but Darwin was the first one to take it and actually make it look good. He was the first one to put a model to it and make it look good. So he used biology to get the thing started. But we need to look sometimes at their best arguments and see what the flaws are with those thoughts. How many of you went through biology in school? Almost everybody. Oh, yeah, that's what I did. Hardly a hitch with my teacher who hated me because I'd argue with her. What's the number one? The number one thing, the first evidence they show that evolution is happening today. Anybody remember? They told everybody this. It's in every textbook I've ever seen. The number one animal that they credit with showing us evolution in our day. No. I'm talking about where we have seen evolution within the lifespan of man. What's the number one place? The frog? Okay. No, they work a little bit with that. Okay, where one form of life. Okay. Okay. Let me try and remind you. Okay. You took this. You took this. I know you did. Okay. It flies around. The moth. The moth. What kind of moth?
Oh, yeah.
Peppered moth. The peppered moth. Okay. Does anybody remember the story of the peppered moth?
No.
Okay. Over in England, back in the 1800s. Okay. No, it was everywhere. I've seen it everywhere. It's the same story. Okay. Over in England, they have a moth that's called the peppered moth. It's a moth that has white spots and black spots. It's a very simple concept. Now, some of these moths are dark and some of them are light, but they just kind of fade in and out. You have certain groups that produce dark moths and other ones that produce a light moth. Well, what happens, they lived on these white trees over there. I don't know if they were aspens or what, but they lived there. And the reason that they did so well was because the trees were white and they blended in, so the predators couldn't see them that good. Birds and stuff that was going to come and eat them. They couldn't see them that good because they blended in with the tree. The Industrial Revolution hit. Now, before the Industrial Revolution hit, there was white moths everywhere and hardly any black ones because the black ones stand out and get eaten. Very simple, right? Is everybody with me? Do you follow me? Okay. Industry hits, puts all kinds of black smoke and gunk up in the air, and it turns the trees brown. Now all of a sudden, the white ones get eaten, and the dark ones stay around. And what they're trying to exhibit is the adaptation of a species, the survival of the fittest, whatever is most able to adapt to its surroundings, and shows that how, if this trend had continued, because after they started cleaning up the industry and the trees began to turn back white again, once again you're back to white moths being in the forefront. It says as the situation, as the circumstances or scenery changes, then the species was adapting and changing with the situation. But who can tell me what's wrong with that thought? They didn't change? What did you have before industry hit? You had white moths and black moths. What did you have afterwards? Black and white. It's just some lived and some didn't. But they kept reproducing. And so, one species never changed into another. Just one happened to exist in greater number at one time. They just changed the numbers. That's all that happened. That's one of, now it's hard to believe because it makes so little sense, but that is the first thing that they're going to show you in biology. The first chapter in my biology book on evolution was a picture of the peppered moth. The first thing. And it's the same thing that they show us today, is how they adapt and how they change and move, and that's on a very small scale, and if we were to expand it on a very large scale, we could see evolution happening. That's quite hard to believe, though. I mean, all you have to do is think about this. Think about what is actually being said. First of all, there's misconceptions. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not. Okay. Let me see this scientist. Let me see the scientist.
Yeah.
Okay, he's got a test tube there, right? He's standing on a podium. Okay, yeah, it's sort of a ziggy kind of thing. Okay, 4 commonly believed facts about the scientist in the white coat. Number 1, this is commonly believed. Number 1, he is unbiased. Number 2, he is objective. Number 3, he is infallible. And number 4, he wears a white coat.
The only one that's true is number 4.
Here, however, is an example of a real scientist for truth, real truth. Number 1, he is biased. Look at his books. He has some books here. Evolution of Man, Origin of the Species, Life of Darwin, Modern Science, Chemistry, Evolution, Anthropology, etc., etc. He is biased. Look at the books he's reading. He is not objective. He is human, meaning he is fallible. He's a guy. That's all he is. He's just a person that happens to have been to school. And number 4, he seldom wears a white coat. Very seldom do scientists. I've seen lots of scientists, and I've never seen one in a white coat. I see more chemical engineers. But we have a misconception that just because a scientist tells us, they must be right, because they speak what science is. Well, that's not at all true. Scientists, they're constantly disagreeing. They're constantly bickering amongst each other. In fact, it's one of the biggest soap operas you've ever seen if you ever read science journals and stuff. The kind of letters that go back and forth, only on a lot bigger scale with bigger words and longer letters. Science is not objective. or scientists anyway, they're not objective. You have to understand they're coming from an angle. That's why when they look at a situation like the peppered moth, they have a preconceived idea about how this is going to fit in. And therefore, they're going to work on that until it does fit into what they're saying. Think about this. One of the biggest problems with evolution is the beginning of life. Mr. Pasteur proved to us, he made the law, he was the one who discovered the scientific law. Now that isn't a theory, I'm talking about a law that says that there is no such thing as spontaneous generation. Life cannot come from nothing. You can't have it. It just simply can't happen. That's a scientific law. But evolutionists are faced with the thought that at some point about 2.5 or 3 billion years ago, while the earth was still cooling, life came from nothing. Life showed up. Now the only way they can come up with this is to say that the situation and circumstances and the atmosphere was different. There were chemicals present on the earth that weren't here then, and if you got a lightning strike to hit this soupy kind of stew stuff at the right temperature, etc., if all these things happen, then possibly you could come up with amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, which is the building blocks of life. But when you think about what's being said, they're saying that life came from nothing, came from death. But that's a scientific law that it can't happen. So what they're saying, though, is that the situation was different, and so they continue to try and prove this, that if they can create the situation, if they can reproduce the right mixture of chemicals and sort of thing, the right mixture of the elements and the circumstances, if they can recreate life in a laboratory, then they can prove that we evolved. And so they spent years, 15, 20 years, working in laboratories, mixing all these chemicals together and trying to get stuff. They finally came up with some amino acids that just showed up and then disappeared, was all they came up with. But what's the problem with that thinking? That they can prove it.
What's the problem with their thinking?
Yeah, that if they can reproduce it, it must happen. What's the problem with that?
You can't reproduce it.
Okay.
There's nobody back there to do it from the beginning.
Okay, what they're saying, it took them 20 years of intelligent thought trying to make it happen. They're saying it happened by accident. See, they can't reproduce anything. They can't do it no matter how much. In fact, the more they try, the less less likely that it ever occurred. From a scientific perspective, you understand? Mm-hmm. See, now if they threw it all in on a big pot and then it came out of there, then yeah, you could believe it. You could believe it happened. But the longer they spend trying to get this to happen, it's only disproving themselves more and more.
Yeah.
They're saying that we have to put so much thought into it to make it as if there's no thought.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's a very, very touchy situation. It's hard for me to believe that these guys actually believe what they do. I have a book here. I like books. This is a great book. This is the Revised Quote Book. These are quotes by proven and established evolutionists. Listen to what Charles Darwin said. This is in a letter that he wrote to a friend regarding the concluding chapters of Origin of the Species, where he set this whole idea and process. He said, "You will be greatly disappointed by the forthcoming book. It will be grievously too hypothetical. It will very likely be of no other service than collecting some facts, though I myself think I see my way approximately on the origin of species. But alas, how frequent, how almost universal it is an author to persuade himself of the truth of his own dogmas." Did you catch that? Mm-hmm. Then we said he had another one here. Let me see if I can find it.
Say that last one again.
Do it again one more time.
Do it one more time.
Yeah.
He said, "You will be greatly disappointed by the forthcoming book. It will be grievously too hypothetical. It will very likely be of no other service than collecting some facts, though I myself think I see my way approximately on the origin of species." He said, "I think I got it figured out, but this book isn't going to be able to prove anything." It says you're going to find it's nothing but a bunch of conjecture. He says, "But alas, how frequent, how almost universal it is an author to persuade himself of the truth of his own dogmas."
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't convinced at all. He wasn't convinced at all. It's a theory that he believed couldn't be proven. In fact, let's see. Let me try and find this other quote I was looking for. Okay, listen to what he said about the fossils. Now, the fossils are credited. If you want to ask a scientist, what is there to show that evolution happened? They say the fossils. That's the main point on which they bank everything, because there's the fossil record that seems to be so strong. Here's what Darwin said in the 1850s. It says, "Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links?" You know what an intermediate is? It's
The missing link.
right,
Yeah.
missing link. We look for one. There's actually literally billions of missing links.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we have to have every link from an amoeba to us today, and every other way from the birds and everything else. So why isn't this Earth full of those intermediate links, the things that stand between? You know, we can see a likeness, therefore they draw a picture of something else that should have been there, but you can't really prove it because they never saw it. It says, "Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain." Geology doesn't reveal it, he said. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Here is what Dr. David Roop said in 1979, 120 years after that was written. He is the curator of geology at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. It says, Well, we are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. See, Darwin didn't have many fossils to work with. It was real thin. Said it's been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. He says we have fewer proof. By this I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded or modified as a result of more detailed information.
I was just reading this last week. I got ICR publication came to the house, and they had a dentist that was studying the way that they had put together some of the fossil skulls of a young child, but it was a young person. They had taken the skull, and the people who originally found it manipulated the skull, actually had it positioned the jaw lower and protruded to try to make it look like, or seem to appear to be, a link of an intermediate evolution, like an ape-like creature. And the man who is taking the title of Interesting Look at Evolution to shoot down basically what it was. He took it and he restructured the way the jaw was supposed to be held together.
And it was a kid.
And it was a kid.
Yeah.
It was a person.
Well, that is very, very common. Look, what appeared to be a nice, simple progression when relatively few data were available now appears to be a much more complex and less gradualistic. It says you don't see those steps near as much as you see actual classes of things. You see different orders. It says, so Darwin's problem has not been alleviated in the last 120 years, and we still have a record which does show change, but one that can hardly be looked upon as the most reasonable consequence of natural selection. Also, the major extinctions, such as those of the dinosaurs and trilobites, are still very puzzling.
So what they find then is they find actually fully developed classes of animals here and there, nothing to show a progression in between from one to another. They just find fully developed classes of its species.
Right,
They find bones.
I wish I had it over here. That makes things so much better.
Okay, how many have seen in the biology book, you got chimpanzee on this side, or actually for you guys, it'd be on this side. Man standing over here walking upright, and you got all these intermediate forms of the guy who apparently starts out with rickets, and then he grows up and is standing upright, and his head shape changes and everything else, and he loses all his body hair. Okay, you've seen that picture, right? Okay, have you ever looked at the names of those as they went down through there? I want to show you. Anybody ever seen one of those as Piltdown Man? Piltdown Man. That's Piltdown. Can anybody see him? You got good eyes, you need to see him. Piltdown. He's eating an apple. Striking, isn't it?
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. Okay, up here, you can see, if everybody can see it. This is what they found of Piltdown Man. Right up there. Everybody see it?
Just got bigger.
See, right up there, just those bones there.
Guam is the missing link.
Okay? Everybody see that?
No.
No, I can't see that here. Okay, can you see that up there in the corner? Everybody see that? That's what they found. Piltdown.
Are you kidding me? That looks like guys I've seen before.
Well, I know.
They just found those bones and they made it, that whole man out of it.
Oh yeah.
Well, they found a femur and made the whole man out of it.
Okay. Here's the story of Piltdown. In 1912, Charles Dawson, a lawyer and amateur fossil hunter, discovered a few fragments of a jawbone and pieces of a skull in a gravel pit near Piltdown, England. The jawbone appeared to be quite ape-like, but the teeth in the skull appeared to be quite human-like. Dawson and the English scientists with whom he consulted were certain that all of these fossil bones were from a single individual. They made that assumption. They just found them there, so they made that assumption. A creature combining human-like and ape-like features. This is one of the very, very first supposed answers to the missing link. It's amazing how many supposed human-like characteristics they thought they could see in the ape-like jaw, and how many ape-like characteristics they imagined they were seeing in the human skull. They declared that these fossils were from a creature intermediate between ape and man that existed 500,000 years ago. 500,000 years ago. This creature was given the official name Eonthropodus dawsoni. Dawson for Mr. Dawson. Means dawn man. Yeah. And he became known as the famous Piltdown Man. Okay, he was one of the first guys that showed up. Although some scientists did not believe that all these bones came from the same individual, most scientists declare that Piltdown Man was a genuine subhuman ancestor of man. For nearly 50 years, Piltdown Man stood as one of our ancestors, and about 500 books and pamphlets were written about Piltdown Man from his skull and jawbone. 500 books and pamphlets. But in 1950, Piltdown Man got buried again. In that year, it is shown that Piltdown Man was a hoax, was a fake. Someone had taken the jawbone of an ape and the skull of a modern human, treated them with chemicals to make them look old, filed the teeth with a file to make them look human-like instead of ape-like, planted the fossil bones in the gravel pit, and fooled the world's greatest exporters.
Oh my.
There's a hoax.
Ouch.
Piltdown Man. But if you look in your book, chances are you're going to find Piltdown Man in that picture.
Yeah.
Look at some of these others. Ramapithecus. See Ramapithecus? It's a very apey-looking guy.
Ramapithecus?
That's his name.
Okay,
Yeah. Been there. About 60 years, part of a fossilized jaw and a few teeth were discovered in India of a creature given the name Ramapithecus. Some famous experts declared, however, that these fossils prove this creature was on its way to becoming man and that he walked upright like humans. In the past few years, however, enough of this creature has been found to show that he was an orangutan. The experts now admit that Ramapithecus was not an ancestor of man at all, but Ramapithecus will still show up in that chart. You got Orca Man. Orca Man. This is a cool guy. Okay, you see his jaw. This isn't a picture of him, but you can see his head there. Just the skull. Just the skull in the middle of the page. That's an AP looking guy, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
So what basically happens is they come up with something that come up with some ideas that they think is somebody, and whether or not they've got the basis to prove it, they go ahead and leave it there. It's the way it's going to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Orca Man. Just recently, a skull cap was found in Spain and declared by Spanish experts to be the skull cap of the oldest fossil man ever discovered in Europe. He was named Orca Man for the village near where he was found. However, French experts were able to confirm that the skull cap was that of a 6-month-old donkey. See, they didn't find that skull, they drew that skull. Piltdown Man was not our ancestor. He was a hoax constructed from the jawbone of an ape and a human skull. Nebraska Man. was not our ancestor. Did you ever hear about Nebraska Man? He's back in the 30s. They found him, and they drew these great pictures. It started showing up in newspapers all over the place, and they found him there in Nebraska. And here's Nebraska Man. He's got his club, and he's walking around with no clothes on, and he's got, you know, little Miss Nebraska Man and the little guy running around. And it's like a family. They're sitting there at the fire in their cave and this kind of stuff. You know what Nebraska Man was? He was constructed from a tooth. Not only him, his whole family, aunts and uncles and everything, from a tooth of an extinct pig. Australopithecus. For many years, Australopithecus, this is the most famous one. He's the one, if it's going to be in that chart, Australopithecus is going to be there. If humans did evolve from apes millions of years ago, there would have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of species of intermediate transitional forms between apes and man. It is strange then that after more than 100 years for searching for the fossils of these species, evolutionists have been able to find only 2 or 3, and these are highly questionable. Australopithecus was reconstructed head to toe on the basis of several cranium, more than a dozen jaws, and hundreds of teeth from 2 South African caves. It was all head structures. There's no way to tell if he was walking over or standing up or whatever. This is all just from his skull. Okay, last one. How many have heard of Lucy?
Yeah.
Everybody know who Lucy is?
Oh, yeah.
Not from Peanuts, Lucy? Yeah, Lucy. Ever heard of Lucy? What was the guy that discovered her again? I forgot the man's name. I think his name is Stevenson. I can't recall. But anyway, because he found Lucy here back in the late 70s, he's one of the biggest things around. I mean, the Time magazine cover and everything, he's got Lucy. You can see here what they found of Lucy. It's supposedly the most complete human skeleton they have that's that old, or ancestor. You got ribs and a thigh and everything like that. It's really fairly impressive. Now they decided that Lucy was a woman from the structure of her hips and stuff like that, and that she was young because she hadn't had any children yet. You can see, so she was a fairly young woman. She was short, and they determined from the knee that she was bowed over and walked somewhat upright. Somewhat upright. Here's some of the trouble with Lucy. They started unearthing the skeleton, but they didn't find anything below the femur there. They didn't find anything. So they used a knee that they found more than 200 feet lower in the earth and over 2 miles away. Now one guy said it is possible. It is possible that at some point in Lucy's young and turbulent life, an alligator bit her leg off, went off into the bottom of the lake and died, and left her knee there. But the chances of that are pretty slim. So what they did is they just take these bones from a generalized area, 2 miles away now, and put it together, and she is supposedly the best example we have today in skeleton form of an intermediate form between a chimpanzee and a man. And that is from something that wasn't even collected at the same spot. They just put these pieces all together. I'll tell you, I could have fun with bones. If people would just bring me a bunch of bones they brought from everywhere, I could really have some fun. And I mean, there'd be all kinds of great stuff that God made. That would be fun. They don't have anything to stand on in the fossil record, and they admit that, and they know that. In fact, this quote book here is full of those sorts of statements by these leading evolutionists, writing about their own material, saying that it's the strongest link. In fact, I saw a video one day of Stephen Gould. That was the man's name, Stephen Gould. And he was being interviewed on there, and he said, the greatest proof we have of evolution is the fossil record. And they continued to interview him, and they're showing clips from it. And somewhere about 5-10 minutes later, down in the interview, he said, the weakest link in evolution is the fossil record. And those sort of contradictory type of statements. But these are from people who have been to school And see, they're the world leaders on this. They've written the articles. They've been popular. They've been published. And so they wouldn't dare think about anybody questioning them. And it really, truly becomes a pride thing with these guys to where they just think that they're above everybody else. Nobody else has the brain to understand and comprehend what they're talking about. And it's a sad situation for them because at some point they actually become deceived by their own thinking, deceived by their own rejection. And it is a scary thing. How much time do we have?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, quick overview if I can. I'm going to ruin some of these signs here. The earth. Was there. We're going to talk about before the flood, how God made the earth in the first place. He said in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What did He make it like? He said in, I believe, verse 6 of Genesis 1, that God created a firmament around the earth. See if I can draw that. And He separated the waters above the heaven from the waters below the heaven. See if I can get this right here. Here's an earth from the side view. You got sort of this firmament thing, okay? Here's a land mass, and here's ocean, okay? You got ocean over here. It says there's waters above the firmament and beneath the firmament. That He separated them so that the dew went out in the morning and watered the whole earth. You understand there was no rain before Noah, right? Remember that?
Right.
Well, how did the Garden of Eden grow then?
In the misty moonlight.
The dew. It was sort of misty. Okay. Let's say that what God meant, because it's very possible here, because He wasn't especially specific about it, that He separated the waters above the firmament and beneath. Therefore, we could have had water up in our atmosphere. It would have been in vapor form, in a very humid sense. You surround the earth with this vapor water canopy. And what you have now is a greenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
The greenhouse effect.
Exactly. You have see, the greenhouse effect isn't near as bad as what they try to make it out to be. Okay. What happens is the sun's rays hit the earth there, and it spreads around the whole earth through this water, because water is good about holding a pretty consistent temperature. Spreads through this vapor and circles the earth. So even roughly from day to day and night and that kind of thing, you're going to have a pretty close to the same temperature. It's not going to change that much. You have a constant mist going around everywhere. Everything is humid. The water stays on the ground, water in the air stays in the air, and you have this humidity. No rain ever actually falls, but you have a greenhouse. The sun hits it. The water filters out all the ultraviolet rays and all the harmful, deadly radiation from the effects up there. And so not only do you end up with a situation where you have this almost tropical paradise kind of a thing, now the main things that cause aging are done away with. The reason that you age the most, physically, the reason your body wears out, your skin goes bad and that kind of thing, is from sun. And from radiation around us. It deteriorates your body. The ultraviolet rays take you down with time. I mean, it just happens. Everybody has it the same way. But, well, I mean, for instance, they have certain people who live up in the highlands of India that at 30 years old look like they're 60 and 80 because they're up high enough and they don't have the atmosphere protecting them, and they age much, much, much quicker because the sun and the radiation will age you. Say you surround the earth with this water canopy. So now all of a sudden there's nothing to get in here and to really cause you to age. Now people are living 6, 7, 8, 900 years long. You look at the first couple chapters of Genesis, how long people lived. It was several hundred years. All of them. Adam lived over 900 years. Many lived over 6 and 7 and 8. Methuselah lived for 969. And then Noah died when he was about 600 years old, but he didn't get on the boat until he was almost that old. And from that time off, you can see the age of men drop drastically. I mean, back down to today's times. Moses lived to be 120, and that was pretty much about it. I mean, that's as far as you were going to go. Why did it change so much? There was a water canopy surrounding the earth. I believe that. And it produced this tropical situation. That's why we can find these fossils of huge ferns and this kind of thing that we would never see today. Because things continue to grow. There was nothing to stop them. They just kept growing and growing. And so people could live longer. When God said, let it rain, all he did was pull the plug on the firmament.
Yeah.
And it dropped. It fell on the earth. And that's exactly where all the water for the flood came from. He didn't make it. He didn't have to make it materialize out of nothing. He just caused what he had already set up there to come down and destroy the place. And that's all it needed. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but reptiles, so long as they live, continue to grow.
What do you know?
They continue to grow.
Who the dinosaurs came
Don't get ahead.
Tomorrow's like
Okay, a 10, yeah, I want to talk about those tomorrow. A 10-foot snake has been living much longer than a 3-foot snake. Simply because so long as they are alive, they are growing, period. I mean, reptiles grow. Turtles, that's how come some turtles that live 100 years old get huge, the tortoises, the sea tortoises and so forth. Now, many reptiles, such as turtles, live roughly the lifespan of man. Now, if man was living for 600, 700, 800 years old, imagine a lizard that has been growing for 700 years. You're dealing with dinosaurs.
Quite a thought, isn't it? Yeah.
You're dealing
Yeah.
with these huge, monstrous animals.
Interesting.
And that's not at all hard to understand. We have records in the Bible of these types of beasts. Job talks about them, and he lived after the flood. He lived after the flood. But Job talks about them. Maybe I want to try and talk about those. But real fast, somebody tell me what happened to the dinosaurs.
they ran out of the food supply.
2 words, they died. Everybody makes a big deal. Where did the dinosaurs go? Was it a meteor that hit the earth, or was, what happened? What happened? They died.
The big ferns stopped growing so big.
Exactly. These huge animals. When they get on this side of the flood, there's no more greenhouse.
That's right.
And the food supply is greatly diminished because there's not as much to eat. There's not as many other animals to eat for the carnivorous ones. And they run out of food. They can't compete because they don't have enough food to feed themselves, and so they die. They lasted for a little while. Some of them, I imagine, are still swimming around. Some Japanese fishermen found one. I wish I had the picture here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever see that of the plesiosaur they pulled up? It was about 60 feet long. It was dead, rotting, and of course they thought it smelled, and they didn't know what it was, so they threw it back in the ocean. But they have pictures anyway. No, really, it
Not
smelled,
dead
and that's
that
why
long,
they
and
got rid
then
of
to be dead, it was still rotting. I mean, it wasn't a skeleton they found.
it.
They
No,
had
no,
flesh on
it still had flesh on it, lots and lots of flesh. They pulled one up in a net. I'm fairly sure that the beast running around there in Loch Ness is not alone. There are thoughts that there are even channels that run from Loch Ness out into the ocean because they found certain levels of salt water in there. And so that the possibility is that they could be even swimming in and out of that place. Maybe it'd be a place of refuge for them or whatever. That's how come you can see these sightings. They generally try and stay down low. But the dinosaurs were here when man was here. I mean, no question about it. No question, because God created them. God made them while man was alive. Adam named them. He said that he named all the animals. He called them, I don't know what language he used or whatever he was, but he named the dinosaurs. He had to have seen them. He had to have known them. Is our time up? 2 minutes? Okay. You got this water canopy. It falls on the earth. It crashes. All of a sudden now, the ultraviolet rays and everything else are able to reach in, and they're able to get to us, and so we age faster. The lizards don't live as long and all that sort of thing, and things just generally don't grow to the proportions that they used to before. This earth has drastically changed since the time of the flood. Read the story of the flood. It said the fountains of the deep were broken up. Not only was there water coming from above, but from the water trapped inside the earth. There was a shifting. I mean, this was something big. Earthquakes and volcanoes and everything. When God destroyed the place, it wasn't just like a general, let the water level come up. He shook it. He rocked the world and literally ripped it apart. People tell you about continental drift. Anybody ever heard that? Where it looked like the continents always used to be in one spot. Well, I believe they probably were. Just look at it. It's
Right.
possible. But see, they didn't split and because what they say is, it's moving a centimeter every 10 years away from each other. Therefore, if you calculate it back, it must have started, 3 billion years ago. See, you're looking at it all wrong. What you need to do is think of it skidding to a stop.
Right.
During the flood, it blasted apart, and they've been moving apart, and they're slowing until they're just creeping down. They're almost stopped, and they're going to quit moving apart from each other because God divided the land. God split it up, and He decided that the earth that's on this side of the flood is not going to be like the one on the other side. They each have their own beauty, but He decided He's going to rip it apart. And so these earthquakes and stuff. Real fast before we close, I'll tell you a story about a brilliant man was teaching a class there. The man's name is Steve Austin. He's a geologist. He studies rocks and that kind of thing. He's just an unbelievable mind. He was sleeping in a hotel bed in California, and he was just laying there, and his mind was going off about all these stories about California falling off in the ocean and sinking. He said, what's going to happen? I wonder if that can possibly happen. Now, this is a geologist, so he knows the right ideas about it. He understands plate tectonics, the plates of the earth, and all that sort of a thing. And he had a friend who runs a Cray 2 computer, supercomputer, one of the big beasts that they use at the Pentagon. And so he got his friend to let him use it. And they put in all this data, said, okay, say you had an earthquake in the ocean with water coming up out of it, down to the deep, that opened up a hole. Is it possible that California could break off and fall in that hole? And what he came up with was this idea, and he showed us the pictures on the graph that it printed out and the model. And what happened was California actually, if you broke a certain part of the earth, California could actually break off, go up on its end, and sink straight down into the molten lava. Go up on end and sink down into there immediately. And what happened was, all of a sudden his mind got to thinking, and so he put the same kind of model. Say the continents were all one at some time. He sort of used a computer, brought them all back together into some form they had before, and put certain fault lines around the right places. And when it busted up, he showed this picture of how long it would have taken. It says day 1, day 2, day 3, so many minutes and this kind of thing. And you can see the continents splitting back apart and going right to where they are simply by putting the right pressure in the right place. All that could have happened right during the flood, all that could have happened right during that cataclysm. There's all kinds of evidence for this stuff. And people who think about it, people who are actually smart and they're not so preconceived about it, or at least they're not so biased in that they think that God couldn't have made this place. If you think about it with the other way, all this evidence shows that God really did make it. He left us a good trail to follow, and he wanted that just for that reason. Just for that reason, because there's all kinds of evidence for it. Tomorrow, I promise you we'll get on dinosaurs and whatever else.
Praise the Lord.